Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Digital Foundry here, and I just wanted to have a little chat about what I think Sony are going to be doing with their PlayStation 5 SSD. We'll get into that in just a minute. In the background here, I've got Concrete Genie playing on my PS4 Pro. Pretty good game, not bad. It's not a full price game; it's quite reasonably priced. Beautiful. I tell you what, beautiful graphics, but the HDR on that is standout. You won't be seeing that in the YouTube video because this won't support HDR. Anyway, so back to the PS5 and the SSD. So confirmed, we know that there's an SSD in the new PS5 console whenever it releases later this year, and it's also confirmed. These are confirmed things that Mark Cerny has said. And in his original interview about when we first realised the PS5 was a thing and it was coming, was he mentioned not just about the SSD being one of the big game changers about the PS5, but he also had there's a little paragraph in the Wired magazine interview where he mentions about it's not just about the SSD, it's about the data and how we move the data in and out using the transfer or using I think he uses IO methods or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but if you look online and have a look at the Wired magazine, you'll see that little transcript there. Now, I've got this theory about this SSD, and at the moment, I don't think anyone else is picking up on this concept or this idea of why the SSD is so important as far as the next generation of consoles are concerned. This isn't what goes on in the PC market space. This will become something completely new and different. Yes, you can get SSDs in PCs. They've been around for years. All they do is help stuff load faster. More or less, that's all they do on PCs. If you've got a big game, it loads quickly. Now, although Sony showed this off about apparently games loading very quickly, sometimes instantly, this isn't just what this SSD is going to do. So I'll have to somewhat try to explain what I'm on about here. So at the moment, the way you've got a CPU, GPU, we know it as an APU, inside the console. So CPU is your central processing unit, always considered to be the brain of a computer. It does all the processes. You then have RAM, which is your memory, and then you've also got your SSD or your hard drive, which is where all the data is stored. So when you put a game on, it goes into your hard drive. Now when you load a game, it goes from the hard drive into the RAM, and then it goes into the CPU, but it goes through the CPU called a cache. Now what a cache is, it's where the last used instructions are kept ready to be used again very quickly, so it doesn't have to go looking for them. This is the CPU now, but it doesn't have to go looking for instructions. So let me explain to you now. I'll try and use metaphorics to try and explain it. But right, so you want to display a picture. The CPU wants to put a picture up on the screen. So the first thing is the CPU will say, it'll send an instruction to the hard drive, and it'll say, look for this picture. Okay, and the CPU will say, well, when you find the picture, let me know, because I'm going to go and do some more tasks while I'm waiting. So the hard drive grabs the picture, sends the data. First of all, it'll send a message back to the CPU saying, I've got that data you were looking for. Here's the picture, and the CPU goes, great, there we are, I'll load that, and it'll load it it'll go straight into the CPU. Once it's finished with it, that data will then be stored in cache 1. As more and more things get processed, it gets pushed out of cache 1 into cache 2. What the caches are a little bit like mini data reservoirs, and as a processor uses up more and more data, and it goes into the first reservoir, once that's full, it'll then push the data that was been in the longest into the second cache and then into the third cache. There's normally 3 caches, and each one is basically like a little reservoir of data that just in case, for instance, if you're playing like a game like Call of Duty, the bullet sound for the gun, that will be nearly always held within one of the caches somewhere because you'll be using it all the time. You're always pressing the trigger. It needs to make that sound. So it doesn't want to go looking for the sound on the hard drive. It needs to basically have that ready to be used in the cache. So when you press the trigger, the sound is played. And there's also animations are also held in there. Or, the graphics are held in there as well. But it's a very limited amount of data that can get stored in there. But it has to load it from the hard drive to the RAM, from the RAM into the CPU. Anyway, this isn't the way the PS5 is going to work. So the way I'll describe this as at the moment, so you're going. So I'm getting a little bit confusing myself here. So metaphorically speaking, let's just say you're going to McDonald's and you're going for the drive-through. I know this is way out there and off a tangent, but you're going to the drive-through, and at the moment, the way you do it is you call at the window, you order your meal, you pay for your meal. They say, "Yes, we're just getting your order ready, sir, madam. If you can drive to the next window and pick your order up when it's ready." So that's what you do. You drive to the next window, they give you your order, off you go. Now, the way to think about this is the window is like the CPU, and the food you're waiting for is like the data. So you go to the first window, CPU, you ask for your order, the CPU takes that order, sends that order to the people cooking the food. Then you've got to go to the second window, which is a second CPU instruction for the food to come back. So it's a little bit of a wet analogy, but basically that's how CPUs and hard drives work at the minute. There's a waiting space between one window and the next. So this is what the SSD will do, and the technique is very new. It's only just come out on PC, and it doesn't work very well on PC at the moment, and it's mainly used in the server market for very fast data, and it doesn't work on Windows. This is why you won't see it on PC video games, because most video games have to use Windows to work. This is a Linux-based system, and it's called pooling. Now, what pooling does, and the only reason it's very new, is because SSDs have only just got fast enough to allow for pooling. And what basically pooling does is the CPU asks for data from the hard drive. And what the hard drive does, instead of sending it into the RAM, it'll say, "Hold on a minute, I'll go and get that data you want right now. I won't mess about. I won't take any longer than normal. I will go and grab that data straight away and get it for you." So going back to the McDonald's analogy, that would be like driving up to the window, ordering your food, and then turning around and say, "Here's your food, here's your order, off you go, sir." So you don't have to go to the second window to pick your food up. This is what I believe. It's not a fact. It's not known as truth yet, but this is what I believe that Sony are going to be doing with the PS5, and this is where the big change in how games will perform, because this will completely change performance of games and what you can do and how much graphics you can put onto a screen at any time, any one time. I mean, if companies, it'll all be down then to companies like the AAA company space, like EA, Activision, Rockstar, whoever, to utilise this. But of course, if they're making third-party games and they're making them cross-platform, they might not want to utilise this, which means you'll just get the same old story of huge amounts of data blocking up your hard drive, and the performance of the game will be limited to the GPU performance and not to the performance of how much data can be taken from the hard drive and pushed straight through to the CPU. But for first-party games, this this will be phenomenal. It will literally blow your mind as far as graphics are concerned. Simply for things like open world games where even the smallest details will still be able to be seen off into the distance. You won't get like LODs which is loading on loading of detail. So at the moment, as you're walking on a open world game, you can see a tree in the distance, and as you get closer, you'll see a point where all of a sudden that tree just changes a little bit, and it's a very sudden change. It just like pops, and suddenly it looks a little bit more graphically thing. And as you get a bit closer, pop, all of a sudden you can see the leaves. And as you get a little bit closer, pop, all of a sudden the shadows become a little bit more detailed. And it's not on a slightly what's the word, like slope. It's not a gentle slope gradient. It's not a gentle gradient of change. It tends to be at the moment very sharp changes in the way these graphics pop in. They can call it even pop in is one of these things that are affected. Pop in, or all of a sudden the graphics just suddenly change, and that's called LODs. So it can get rid of that because they can store 100 different versions of what that tree would look like at different stages, and just have it gradually changing as you're walking towards it. So although there would be technically a pop, they can make the pops far less severe by increasing the amount of changes. The other thing is, what a lot of people don't realize is they're all going, oh, games are going to be huge. They're going to be 200 gigabyte, 300 gig. Actually, no, that's not the way it works at the moment, because hard drives are so slow. A lot of the time, going on about trees, if a tree's in the game and it's in multiple levels, they have to put maybe that same tree is repeated as data. Sometimes 30 or 40 times that same piece of data will be repeated into the hard drive if it's a game that needs to stream its data from the hard drive. Think something like Witcher 3 or big games like maybe a Halo game. That's how they work. They have to stream that data multiple times through each level, and it has to be stored within the hard drive multiple times. With an SSD, you don't need to do that. You only need the one piece of data, because it doesn't matter where it is written on the hard drive. It can be grabbed and pulled instantly. So you only need to have that data written once. So instead of having a piece of data written 40 times, you've now gone to a piece of data that only needs to be written down once. That in itself will save a lot of space. You'll go back to like the old I remember Skyrim is an example on the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 Skyrim came in at about 4 gigabytes, and most of that was audio files, because essentially it was streaming one piece of data for each asset off the hard drive. It didn't need to repeat those assets, whereas if you look at Skyrim on the PS4, the remaster, it's got this thing where it repeats all the assets all the time because it wants the higher resolution, the 4K graphics. It has to repeat it so many times, and then it ends up being 60, 70 gigabytes. Oh, I think it's over 40 or 50 gigabyte on PS4. Anyway, so I've rambled enough. So basically what I'm saying is PS5 will use a technique called pooling, and this pooling will revolutionize video gaming for the next 10 to 20 years. And it's a technique that's brand new, and most PCs don't even use it, because it tends to be used as a server technique, and it's basically down to super high speed hard drives. And the only point in having pooling is if you've got a super high speed hard drive. So anyway, thank you for your view, guys, and I'm going to bid you farewell. If you like what you hear, give it a little thumbs up, and I'm always happy to read the comments in the comment section below. And I'm sorry it was a little bit of a ramble. I didn't really mean to ramble on for 15 minutes about this, but sometimes I do like to ramble. I apologise. Anyway, goodbye.